Until she became Empress of Rome, Valeria Messalina had not fully understood the loneliness that came with the position. The Senate bowed before Claudius. Laws were passed in the name of Claudius. The Praetorian Guard swore loyalty to Claudius. And except for Caligula's German bodyguard, which Claudius had reassigned to guard the empress, no one swore loyalty to Messalina. Beyond what others were willing to carry out on her behalf, the young empress held no authority of her own. And yet, her ambitions for the future of the son she shared with Claudius burned no less brightly than his, as the boy's father. And so, in the first year and a half of her husband's reign, Messalina had carefully gathered to herself the necessary allies required to ensure that her son, Tiberius Claudius Germanicus, would one day sit upon his father's throne. Tiberius Claudius Narcissus was the easiest to sway. His loyalty to Claudius, the man who had released him from slavery, was unflinching. Not for anything would he betray the emperor. This former slave not only commanded the respect of Rome's Senate, but in the service of Claudius had generated so much wealth as to make many of the senators look like paupers by comparison. And Narcissus wanted what Messalina wanted, for the principate to pass to Claudius's son, making the imperial freedman the perfect ally to support the removal of Julia Livilla, because Narcissus understood the threat of Livilla as much as Messalina did. Livilla was a descendant of Augustus and Germanicus. She carried in her the divine blood that both Messalina and Claudius lacked. The freedman Gaius Julius Polybius, however, was not as easy as Narcissus. Claudius's historical researcher and literary advisor had come into his service during his second marriage to Aelia Paetina, a woman who had patronized his literary skills. Polybius favored her daughter, Claudia Antonia, over Messalina's children. But Polybius, just like Claudius, had a weakness for beautiful women, a weakness Messalina could easily exploit by dispatching Cleopatra, one of her freedwomen, to the bed of her husband, so that she was free to orchestrate the seduction of Polybius. The targeted seduction of more than a few freedmen and senators tied to her dynastic goals had proven a very effective tool in securing some version of loyalty. After all, who would dare accuse the empress of adultery if the accusation brought them to ruin as well? And so, before long, Polybius belonged to Messalina as well, though not happily. The literary freedman understood the power Messalina now held over him. He was no longer free, but once again owned, this time by the empress. And so Polybius would have to be reminded, coerced even, whenever he felt his loyalties torn between Messalina and Claudius. Fortunately for Messalina, the removal of Appius Silanus required no such coercion, because Narcissus was only too willing to be rid of a rival who might challenge Claudius's control of Rome. And so, together, the two of them decided how Silanus would fall. Because Julia Livilla had already been accused of adultery with the philosopher Seneca, another accusation of adultery would feel rote, less powerful. And, according to all who knew him, Silanus had no mistresses or sexual secrets which could be held over him. So, the removal of Appius Silanus would have to be divine revelation, a vision from the gods, one warning of an attempt on Claudius's life, coinciding with a note from Narcissus summoning Silanus for a pre-dawn meeting. And of course, Claudius believed. Fear of murder and betrayal was in his every thought, a fear that made manipulating Claudius that much easier. Now Silanus was dead, and so was Julia Livilla. Agrippinilla, however, had left Rome with her husband to take up residence in Ephesus. For now she was out of the way. And when she did return to Rome, Messalina could see to her removal at that time. Messalina reclined on the bed, and she waited. He would arrive soon, very soon, and she had waited for so long. The candles were lit, and a jug of warmed, spiced wine sat on the nearby table beside 2 empty cups. Tonight, when he came through her doors, he would finally be hers. The first time she had laid eyes on him, his beauty had stopped her in her tracks, made her catch her breath. Having known nothing but the aging body of her husband and those few plump senators and freedmen she needed to achieve her ambitions, Messalina had never known the feel of a young man's body. The pure pleasure, the reckless abandon. She had summoned him once to her chambers and made her attraction to him known. But he turned her down, respectfully declining her offer. Her, the Empress of Rome, a woman few men would refuse, given the chance. So why had he? Finding out that he was involved with another woman only made matters worse. An older woman named Poppaea Sabina, hailed at one time by Caligula as the most beautiful woman in all of Rome. To be refused was bad enough, but to be overlooked in favour of another woman was more than Messalina could bear. But tonight, Messalina would have him. She had made certain of it. The knock at the door was barely audible. "Domina," came his muffled voice. "Enter," Messalina said softly as she laid back on the bed. The door opened cautiously. He first stuck his head through, looking into the room wide-eyed, then stepped fully through the door, closing it behind him. "Minister," Messalina cooed, "how lovely of you to visit me." The young and beautiful dancer, who had once enjoyed a lofty position in Caligula's court, politely folded his hands and bowed his head. "You summoned me?" "Invited you," Messalina quickly corrected, as she oozed luxuriously onto her stomach. "As you say, Domina," Minister responded. "How may I be of service?" Messalina cocked her head to one side. "It was very naughty of you to refuse me," she chided, a half-smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "You forced me to take measures." She slid off the bed and moved to the table. Grabbing the jug of wine, she poured 2 cups, then held one out to him. Minister hesitated a moment, then stepped forward. He accepted the cup from her and took only the smallest sip. "Tell me," Messalina began, "about Poppaea. Is she really the most beautiful woman in all of Rome, as I have heard?" Minister cleared his throat and then shifted uncomfortably. "She is the second most beautiful woman in Rome," he responded with a courteous nod of the head. Messalina smiled, moving back to the bed. But Minister remained beside the table, the cup of wine clenched tightly in his grip. "Tell me about your meeting with my husband," she said as she settled comfortably onto the soft blankets. Minister's eyes studied the floor. "The Emperor Claudius," he began, voice timid, "instructed me to do anything you command." Messalina smiled to herself. "Anything?" Minister nodded his head, his eyes still on the floor. Messalina then patted the bed beside where she reclined. Setting the wine cup back down on the table, Minister walked over to the bed and sat rigidly on its edge. Messalina placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the tightness of his muscles. Sliding close behind him, she then leaned over and blew out the candles. The aftermath of the Scribonianus rebellion, a threat that had nearly seen Messalina's husband abdicate his power, placing their lives in mortal danger, had turned Claudius's attention to an unmistakable realization. The troops were loyal to Claudius, which was why Scribonianus's rebellion collapsed. But the generals and senators who led those troops had little to no respect for the man who, in their eyes, had seized the throne by military force. The only way to win the support of the senators Claudius determined, was to make himself worthy of the title Imperator, a name which implied successful military conquest. But that was something Claudius had not achieved. And so, as autumn fell on Rome, the Emperor Claudius announced that he would undertake the conquest of Britannia, the same campaign that had been abandoned by Caligula. During the winter months, 40,000 Roman soldiers would be transferred from their various provinces and marched to the coast, where they would be ready to cross the Channel and invade Britannia in the spring. Of course, Messalina's husband was old and infirm. He would do no fighting. Instead, he gave command of the campaign to Aulus Plautius, the governor of Pannonia, who had not sided with the Scribonianus revolt. Plautius would develop the military strategies, the battle plans, and oversee the siege works of any resistance. Claudius would simply travel to Britannia once the island was subdued, and take his place at the head of the legions for the very last battle. But even that was dangerous, Messalina worried. Claudius could be ambushed on his way through Gaul, or his ship could go down while crossing the Channel, or he could fall in battle even if it was choreographed for his maximum safety. And if Claudius did not return to Rome, who then would be in charge? Messalina's son was a toddler, one who could end up with his brains dashed out against the wall, like Caligula's daughter, if someone new took control. And thus far, Messalina's husband had been very non-committal regarding who should be his heir. Naturally, most looked to the two men betrothed to Claudius's daughters, Lucius Silanus and Pompeius Magnus, neither of whom were actually members of the family yet, and so would have no reason to keep her son around if one of them were put on the throne next. What would Messalina do then? How would she keep her family safe? She had nowhere to flee. Her mother hadn't spoken to her since the death of Appius Silanus. Without Claudius, Messalina had nothing. He was the source of whatever power she had acquired, and now he was leaving.